Wow. Thank you. I'm always kind of overwhelmed when I hear that. So anyway, thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. This was interesting when Mark asked me to do this because I said, I'm not really particularly religious. I was raised in the Christian faith, but I don't go to church. And so I thought, what could I possibly talk about? And one of the themes was name a book that influenced you. And so I said, I got it. So what I want to talk about to you, and I apologize that it is lunchtime, that I want to talk to you about my journey and the food choices that I've made through my life and where I am today and maybe where I may go later. So first of all, I want to say I'm not a theologian. So whatever I talk about religions and texts, it's just my basic knowledge, and it's not my intention to influence anyone. We all make our own choices, and I respect your choices as I hope you respect mine. And as I said before, I was raised in the Christian faith. So let me start with the beginning. I like to talk about one of my earliest memories, and I was probably about 4 or 5, and I remember sitting at the dining room table, and my father said, you can't leave the table until you finish eating your food. Well, I kept chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing and chewing on this piece of meat because I didn't like it. And those of us that are my age remember having our parents tell us, you have to finish everything on your plate because there's starving children in Africa. And my mother would say, this is not a restaurant, you eat what I put on the table. So many of you may not understand, may not have parents that said that, but I know there's some in the room that do. So that was like my early memory, and I was trying to figure out why. And so in the summer before my senior year in high school, I read 2 books that helped me crystallize the why and led me on this lifelong journey. And the 2 books are, if I get this right, The Autobiography of Malcolm X and Back to Eden. Now, you may say, how do they relate, right? So let me kind of tell you. So I read the Autobiography of Malcolm X probably the summer of 1968. Malcolm X was murdered in the 60s. He was a world leader. I read that book, and it was an amazing book because it talked about a man who went from a hustler to a world leader. And his transformation was just unbelievable. But what connected me to that book, and the thing that I remember today, and I can't remember much else, is that he didn't eat pork. The religion of Islam said you do not eat pork because it's unclean. And I said, I remember growing up, Sunday dinners, Sunday morning we'd have bacon. Sunday dinners we'd have some form of ham. And it was those 2 meals that were like the worst meals for me to get through. And so then it said something to me that little first mind of mine at 4 or 5 said I didn't like meat. Maybe there was something to this. So I began a search, and it led me to the book Back to Eden, which is a Bible even today for anyone who wants to learn about how to eat, what to eat, how to cure yourself, not using prescription drugs and medicines, has all different kinds of cures. So it was the combination of those 2 books, and from there I kept reading other books. So too many that I can't even remember, but it was these 2 books that really kind of connected with me and said, there might be something to this. And so because I was only a senior in high school, I still had to, pay attention and eat what was on the table. So my freshman year, the fall of 1970, was when I decided I was going to become a vegetarian. So I came to campus. Some people may know this, remember this, that back then we all ate in the Student Union, which is now called the Hall of Presidents. And back in 1970, there was really only one diet, and it was a meat and potatoes diet. And I remember the first 2 weeks in the Student Union saying, I can't eat this, and the food fights, and I can't eat this. And I went to the dean of students and said, I cannot eat this. I really cannot eat this. So that was like my public statement, that I am now a vegetarian. So they gave me my money back and said, okay, fend for yourself. I was living in Centra Stillman. I had a hot plate and I had the windowsill. There were no microwaves at the time. And I promptly got sick. And if it was not for the opening of the cultural center, the second semester when we had a cook, she's what saved me. And so then I was able to eat. And I was a vegetarian at the time, and so I ate cheese and eggs and stuff. So, but what it did was, it opened my eyes, and I was so passionate about this path that I remember writing a paper in chemistry on the chemical effects of food and taking a class in Islam. And then I began to realize that what I was feeling in terms of what food choices I wanted to make had some basis in religions. So, Judaism. So the quotes, you shall not see a kid in its mother's milk. If any of you are Jewish, you understand kosher diets and how you don't mix dairy with meat. And there's a certain way, I know the rabbis are here, and you can certainly say more, there's a way that you have to slaughter the animal so you don't eat the blood of the flesh. And then you also have Christianity. Christianity, I find, is probably one of the only few religions that doesn't really have restrictions on what foods to eat and not eat. And then we have Islam, which is where I came through this, is that you do not eat the pig because they consider the pig as being unclean, and also in Judaism. And then I realized that there's some connection here. You know, there's Islam and there's Judaism, and they're talking about an animal that's unclean. So I said, okay, I need to figure this out, because it's one thing to hear it and see it and read it. There's another thing to live it and learn it and figure it out for yourself. So that's when I began to continued my study. And I forgot. Sorry about that. Hinduism. And Hinduism really was the one religion that really sort of advocated being a vegetarian, where the other ones just kind of said, you know, don't eat certain foods or don't eat certain foods on certain days. But Hinduism was the one that said, really sort of advocated not eating any meat. Declares that one should refrain from eating all kinds of meat, for such eating involves killing and leads to karmic bondage. So it was this combination of these texts I read leading up to my freshman year of college that convinced me that I was ready for a change. And so, but little did I know that my passion for abstaining from the consumption of meat would be such an impact on my life and how I saw the world. In the 1970s, there were few vegetarians, and we were seen as health nuts. Since vegetarianism has become more common, I mean, you know, you go now to the Frank Dining Hall, there's plenty of options. I mean, imagine 1970 if you were a vegetarian eating, and your only choices were meat and potatoes. But I had to learn, and in the learning, let's see. We like to label. So in the learning process, there are different types of vegetarians. So the flexitarian, semi-vegetarian, people that eat meat sometimes, pescatarian, and that was new to me. Someone said to me a couple years ago, "Are you a pescatarian?" And I said, "What is a pescatarian?" Because I didn't know what a pescatarian is. Someone who only eats fish. Lacto-ovo, eggs and dairy, ovo, eggs, vegan, which is what I am, raw vegan, macrobiotic. You do eat some meat, and fruitarian. So in the 40-plus years that I've been a vegetarian, I've had countless questions why I don't eat meat, how I get my protein, my physique as a vegetarian. And so what I like to really want to talk about is, with any path we choose, there's what I call the external dialogue and the internal dialogue. The external dialogue is the ones that you have with family, friends, your religious leaders, your co-workers, your peers. And it's the information that you kind of take in, and religious leaders, it's the information that you kind of take in to figure out where you are, how you fit in the world. But it's the inner dialogue that you then take that information and you process that information and you come up to who you are and your values. So my external dialogues have included defending my choices with the inquisitive, the critics, and the knowledge seekers. I have watched my food choices become more mainstream as society continues to seek knowledge about food, health, and lifestyle. My internal dialogues turn the external inward, using my defense to build my values. I chose these values in order to keep my body and mind and spirit healthy. I knew that my values would impact others in my life. I knew that my spouse would have to have similar food choices because I wanted a meat-free household to raise children. My journey and choices had broadened my perspective of life. I know that my food choices are not responsible for the death of an animal, that I don't need an animal's life for my life. I have deep respect and understanding of our land. I choose to purchase as much organic produce as I can. I understand and appreciate the dangers of agribusiness and the overuse of chemicals in our food production and in turn our land and water. I understand that a meat-based society contributes to climate change and contributes to water pollution, that it takes more resources to sustain a meat-based diet than a plant-based one. I still recall my parents saying, "Eat all your food on the table because there are starving children in the world." We are aware today that the harm of the meat industry has on the environment, from the runoff into our waterways to the depletion of forests to make room from grazing land, and how the acreage is used to grow crops would provide more food than the cattle that use the land. I have been conscious of the effects of what I ingest to try and be as healthy as possible. Those external and those internal dialogues bring me to who I am today. I am a vegan. I abstain from eating meat of any kind. I do not consume any food that comes from an animal. I only eat fruits, vegetables, legumes, grains, nuts, and seeds. I do use honey, and I consume organic produce as much as possible. I limit my intake of processed food and sugar, gluten, and soy. I have found that these foods have a negative impact on my system in high quantities. I avoid drugs and antibiotics, and thankfully, I'm happy. But while what I have learned and experienced over the years has influenced my choices, it was that little girl of 4 or 5 who didn't like meat that is the core of why I abstain and helped me understand my true self. While I may not go to church, I was raised in the Christian faith, and it's how I view the world from my early teachings. I do consider myself a spiritual person. I believe there is a higher power, and that it will guide us if we tap into that source, and there are many ways to do that. The link to my spirituality, though, was fasting. I first turned to fasting as a means to give the body a rest, to cleanse the body of toxins. It was a very self-centered act. I recall my first long fast was about 30-plus days, and how much energy and clarity it gave me, and I began to understand Jesus. I understood Jesus fasting 40 days and 40 nights. I understood Moses. It was how fasting affected me spiritually that resonated with me. By fasting and praying, I was able to quiet my mind and listen to my body and tap into my soul. Fasting allows me to detach myself, and I believe those who do fast, to detach yourself and really connect with the Spirit. And the beauty of that is that every single religion talks about fasting. And you have to ask, and that's something I'll ask you, why is that? Why is it by abstaining and fasting does it connect us to a higher power? Gives us the ability to see clearly. And a lot of times through my life, I have purposely fasted when I needed answers, when I needed direction, and when I needed guidance. And I find it so very powerful. And I understood, though, when I began this process, that my discovery wasn't unique. And I find, there's that one common thread that various religions use. Oh, hold on. Oh, I forgot this part. The reason to become a vegetarian. Health reasons, the environment, ethical, and global food shortage. And you'll see that you notice that I really, in my evolution, can tap into all of those. And it's not just because I didn't like, but it goes back to because I didn't like meat. But by going through that and really connecting, I realized that it connected me to other things. It connected me to wanting to be, not save the environment, but be respectful of the environment, to be respectful of others. And that's really, that's how we connect on a humanity level. That's the spirituality, and that's what I've gotten out of. So there are multitude of references to fasting in the Bible, and I just list them, and I know those of you who probably know the Bible better than I do can talk about that. I found some, the internet's fabulous. I found some references to fasting. Those of you who are Muslim or know Islam know that in Ramadan you fast for 30 days, and it's supposed to bring you back and to make sure that you're all equal and sort of get rid of the worldly things in your life to connect to Allah. Oops, what happened? What'd I do?
I think that's the last slide.
Oh, what happened? I missed, oh, okay. My daughter put these together for me. So, I think that's really, I guess the point that I'm trying, and then there's Hinduism. In the Hinduism philosophy, food means gratification of the sense, and to starve the senses is to elevate them to contemplation. So that's why the Hindus believe in fasting. And Judaism is the Day of Atonement that they fast. Again, it's to cleanse ourselves of our sins. So I don't know if it makes sense, but for me it was that journey that I started really at 4 or 5, that instinctively my soul and my spirit told me that this was the path that I was to take. And it was my path. But then in taking that path, I realized that I had commonality with others, whether they were religion seekers or people like me who, okay, I'm religious, but not really, real religious. But it's that my personal connection to God is what has led me through that. So what I want to say, and hopefully there's questions, I never would have imagined that reading those 2 books would put me on a journey of how I would choose to live my life. That single principle of abstaining from pork and my instinctive dislike of meat connected me to a search to research, learn, listen, and experiment to find comfort in my belief to be a vegan, and provided me with a connection to God. It just never, and I guess the point that I'm making, or want to make, is that I hope that you leave understanding the power of choices that you will make over your lifetime. They will be your guides through your journey. Your choices in life can be shaped by the dialogues you have externally with others around you, and I hope that you embrace similarities and differences in voices and person's points of view, because it will help shape who you are. And then you take it internally. And when you take it internally, you decide what is good for you, what is not good for you, and lead your life that way. But it's a lifelong process. And be open to old and new ideas, because what I realized, that what I went through wasn't new, that people and humanity have been dealing with this for centuries. And it was sort of a comfort to realize at some point, that I wasn't like the health nut. I wasn't strange, that there really is a continuum. So don't be afraid to challenge yourself, because sometimes you may think you are on the path of least travel, but you realize along the way that there are many people and knowledge seekers with you. So thank you.
Now we've got time for questions.
Questions.
Or comments.
Or comments. Okay.
Have you convinced them all?
Oh, well, no, I don't try to convert anybody. So I was telling Mark that, the one thing I realized about the journey that I was on being a vegan, it was because clearly when I decided there weren't any. And I would always get peppered with the questions, well, at dinner, why do you eat that? And so I was telling Mark earlier, it took me 50 years to say, you can ask me any question about what I eat, but please not while I'm eating. Because I could tell stories. Oh. Yes. No?
Wow. Hey, how you doing?
Good.
I guess I was going to say in a world, or at least maybe say in the United States, where, or even in this area where families, things are, their lives are so fast. You got, parents working. You got, and I'm thinking more of, say, working class families. What would be ways to be able to make sort of this type of lifestyle more acceptable to them, or more affordable? Where I see some of the challenges is that we eat, a lot of times we're trying to eat on an affordable sort of budget, and a lot of times the healthy way is not necessarily can be fit within that, so we choose just to be able to eat and survive.
Well, I know that there's study. I'm on a board of a farmer's market, and there is research out there that's saying it's not really as expensive as you think it is. In terms of organic, the prices are coming down. I understand Walmart has organic food now, and I think it's easier if you make food a centerpiece of who you are, in terms of not necessarily it's nutrition, but if you look at food as nutrition for the body, mind, and spirit, then you then begin to kind of see it in a different context. And I have friends, and we try to do it where we have family meals. There's people, you can grow gardens. I mean, there's really ways to do it. There are problems in urban areas because they have what they call food deserts, where it's more difficult. But I think what has given me hope is that I have seen the trend. I have seen a society where the only way you could be healthy would to be eat meat and potatoes, and that pyramid that they have has changed, where you have research now that talks about the connection between diet and disease. So when Jethro Kloss wrote his book in 1932 and talked about how meat causes cancer and you shouldn't eat a lot of salt, it took how many decades before science caught up with it. So I think it is happening. And then when you go outside this country, there are more people that eat less meat than we do here in this country. So it's changing. And I think even, I always say, whatever you do, whether it's what you eat or what you do, if you're conscious about it, if you make a conscious decision that, I like meat, and there's nothing wrong with it. I like meat and I'm going to eat it. But it's a conscious decision, because, when I talked about being part of my Christian belief, I believe, and I believe we believe this in Christianity, is that we're created in the image of God. And being created in the image of God, I feel that I have a responsibility to this temple, because my body is my temple. And I have a responsibility to do whatever I can do to honor the God in me. And for me, that means eating a plant-based diet. For you, it might mean something else, but that's what it means to me. And I think, that's kind of where I am. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about raising a family in a vegetarian household?
So I think I might have mentioned it. So when I was in my 20s, and I was dating, I didn't think it was important that the person I dated, what their food choices were. And then I got engaged to a guy, and I had said, well, you know, I want to raise my child as a vegetarian. He says, well, I want to raise my child as a meat eater. I had to respect that, and I realized I had to marry someone that had the same food choices as I do. And I found, you know, I found my husband, and he had been a vegetarian, had gone off, and then when he met me, he became a vegetarian again. So us living in the household, we were able to raise our daughter. And because my parents raised me, my father was a non-practicing Catholic, and my mother was an Episcopalian, and they said, you make your own choice in terms of your religious beliefs. I said, I'm going to do that with my daughter. So when she was young, she was raised as a vegan. But when she got to a certain age, I said, you can choose how you wish to eat. And she chose to stay a vegetarian. So for us, it was very easy because we all ate the same way. But that was a conscious decision I had to make, because I realized, how could I tell my partner, well, who has a certain belief, that we can't follow that belief because my belief is different. So it became very easy. And then my daughter adopted it on her own. I remember she was, I think she was at daycare, and I guess the babysitter, I don't know if she did it on purpose or not, a piece of meat fell on the ground or something. My daughter looked at it and just walked the other way. She was in nursery school. She didn't know the color of butter. And so they wrote a note home saying, your daughter doesn't know the color of butter. I said, because she's never seen it before. So, you know, so it was easy. It was really easy. And again, it was just respecting, you know, so it kind of closed the pool of who I could choose to marry, though, at the time. Yes?
Two kind of related topics, I think. One, both related to the kind of challenges of sustaining a lifestyle like that. One would be the thing of busyness, in that, at least in my experience, the easiest food to get is very frequently stuff that I shouldn't be eating, and sometimes the hardest food to get is stuff that I should be. So that's one question: is how, I mean, you know, when you're in the thick of your professional life, how did you handle that? And then, relatedly, also, I would imagine in your professional life, the question of sort of hospitality, and how, you know, when you are either being greeted into someone's house for a meal, or when you're greeting others into your house, how did you handle, or how do you handle those two kind of,
Right.
I think, challenging situations?
Well, first of all, you prepare a lot of food yourself, and it really is a lot easier. And the bigger challenge was always traveling, and so I would always have to. My husband used to say, "Oh, you're always, you know, looking for where to eat wherever we go, because we have to figure out where we can eat." So that's that, and then, you know, I'll carry little, you know, I have food with me, and that's how I travel. In terms of for a very long time, I would not allow any flesh in my house. And so if I invited anyone over, they knew that they were going to get a plant-based meal. I have sort of a little more flexible with that, is that I will allow it in my home, but I will not allow it to be cooked in my home. And if I'm going to somebody's house for the first time and they don't know, then I will let them know, because the worst thing you want to do is go and have a host fix something and you say, no, I can't eat it. So I generally do that. And if it's something that's potluck, then I'll bring something that I know that I can eat. So that's sort of how I've managed. And now it's just so much easier. There was no Whole Foods in Hamilton when I was here. You know, when we travel, the greatest pleasure is to tell the wait staff, tell the chef what I eat and have them fix something for me. And I've had some of my best meals by just giving the chef the freedom to sort of make whatever. And Seven Oaks. As soon as I walk into Seven Oaks, I got a meal because we sort of perfected it over the years. They kind of know what I can eat, and I have a delicious meal. And you go to the banquets and you say you're vegetarian, everybody around you says, "Ooh, that's so good," because it's always colorful. So that's sort of how I've done it. But it's so much easier now, and it was. But because it was something that was internal to me, versus something that was a fad, oh, let's become a vegetarian, then I stuck to my course. I really stuck, and I really do believe it was my connection to the Spirit that made me kind of choose this path. Okay. Did I convert anybody? No, just joking.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay.
Let's thank Diane for
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And you're going to stick around a little bit, I assume?